And that is exactly why this whole thing got more dangerous the second Claressa Shields kept talking, because people are still framing this like it is just a messy breakup side quest when it is not. It is a narrative war now, and Remy Ma, Claressa Shields, and Papoose are not even playing the same sport inside it. Everybody saw the boxing clips. Everybody saw the public back and forth. Everybody saw Papoose standing beside Claressa, and a whole lot of people walked away thinking the simple version was the real version. Remy is mad. Claressa is unbothered. Pap moved on. End of story. No, that is the fake easy version. The real version is uglier, smarter, and way more revealing than that. Because the December cheating allegations, the public papers talk around the divorce, the April diss records, the June subliminal paranoia, and the August fight week rollout all connect to one bigger truth. Every time Claressa tries to prove she is above the drama, she ends up feeding it. Every time Papoose tries to sound stable, he sounds split in half. And every time Remy decides to rap instead of beg, the entire conversation bends back toward her. That is not random. That is power. Personal stakes, because reputations and relationships are bleeding out in public. Cultural stakes, because hip-hop audiences know the difference between somebody controlling a moment and somebody reacting to one. Systemic stakes, because blogs, interviews, social clips, fight promo, and music snippets are now one machine, and whoever understands that machine wins before the audience even realizes the game changed. And when we get to the part where a championship weekend still somehow turned into a Remy conversation, you are going to understand why this story was never about who is louder. It was about who still owns the center of gravity. Drop your thoughts in the comments, hit like, and subscribe. Let's get into it. So let's slow this all the way down, because if you do not lay the board out correctly, you miss the real tension. The public blow-up did not begin with some random August clip. The foundation was already cracked months before that. In December 2024, Remy Ma publicly accused Papoose of allegedly having an affair with Claressa Shields and posted alleged text messages. While Claressa fired back online and Papoose answered by accusing Remy of cheating repeatedly and saying he had wanted a divorce. From there, the breakup stopped being a private marital collapse and became a fully public content ecosystem where every person involved started speaking to two audiences at once, the actual people in the mess, and the millions of spectators reading character through captions, interviews, and bars. That changes everything, because once the audience becomes a participant, silence is interpreted, timing is interpreted, body language is interpreted, and even a win is no longer just a win. And the stakes were never just who cheated on who. That is the lazy headline version. The real stakes are brand identity, loyalty mythology, crossover credibility, and public ownership of the truth. Papoose spent years building a public image as the devoted husband who stood 10 toes down through Remy's prison years and through every piece of public scrutiny that came after. Remy's brand has always been built on toughness, pen game, memory, and refusing to be treated like a victim in her own story. Claressa's brand is discipline, dominance, historic achievement, the GWAD identity, and being too accomplished to be reduced to somebody's plus one. So what happens when those three brands collide in public? Somebody's mythology breaks. If Pap is fully moved on, why does every appearance still feel like he is explaining himself? If Claressa is fully locked in, why does she keep getting pulled into rap-coded exchanges where the audience is grading tone, wit, and subtext instead of just boxing? And if Remy is supposedly washed, why does the timeline keep orbiting her anytime she chooses to rap or post? That is why this matters right now. This is not one embarrassing celebrity triangle. This is a live test of who can survive a narrative economy where talent matters, but timing and public framing matter too. And listen, we also have to be honest about the audience split here. Hip-hop fans are not watching this like boxing fans. Boxing fans may still grade Claressa primarily on belts, records, and greatness in the ring. Hip-hop fans are grading the whole movie. They are grading whether somebody sounds pressed, whether a line hit, whether a reply was too fast, whether a caption gave desperation, whether a man looks consistent, whether a woman looks rattled, whether the strongest person in the room is actually the one speaking the least. That is why the same event gets interpreted two completely different ways depending on who is watching. One crowd sees a champion defending herself. Another crowd sees a crash-out spiral disguised as confidence. One crowd sees Papoose supporting his woman. Another crowd sees flip-flop Pap trying to stand next to a new chapter before the old chapter has stopped burning. And right there is the first major tension driving this whole video. If everybody says they are moving forward, why does every single public move still feel like a response to Remy? Start with the most visible evidence, because the surface layer alone is already crazy. Piece 1 is the original public detonation. Remy took to Instagram in December 2024, accused Papoose of allegedly being involved with Claressa Shields, and posted alleged text messages. Claressa answered with that now-famous line asking how a woman with 2 boyfriends could be mad at a man with a girlfriend, and Papoose publicly said Remy had cheated repeatedly and that he had requested a divorce numerous times. That is not some anonymous gossip thread. That is all 3 primary players stepping onto the stage and making the mess official. And the moment that happened, the audience stopped asking whether there was drama and started asking who was telling the truth, who looked believable, and who looked strategic. Does everybody understand how important that shift is? Once a dispute becomes public by direct participant testimony, the winner is not automatically the person with the cleanest explanation. It is the person whose story keeps feeling confirmed by later events. That is the trap. Then piece 2 lands almost immediately and makes the whole thing look even less settled than people tried to pretend. Claressa did not just defend herself. She escalated, publicly challenging Remy to fight in the ring and posting, "Come get yo ass hooped crash out." Now pause there. A lot of people treated that like strength. I looked at it differently. Because when an elite boxer is dragged into a rapper's domestic and cultural mess, the strongest move is usually to tower above it. The second you offer the ring like you are stepping into a reality show trailer, you are no longer just protecting your name. You are entering the content. You are volunteering to become one of the episodes. And from that point on, the audience starts grading you on their terms, not yours. That is how a historic athlete can walk into a side arena and suddenly get judged like a blogger, a rapper, or a podcast guest. Crash Out Champ thought she was demonstrating fearlessness. A lot of viewers read it as overinvestment. There is a difference. Piece 3 is where Remy starts reminding people that, whatever else is going on in her life, rapping is still her home court. In April, she released W.Y.F.L and seemed to take shots at both Papoose and Claressa Shields. The most important bars were not even the most insulting ones. The important bars were the ones addressing authorship and narrative control, pushing back on Papoose's previous claim that he wrote a huge percentage of her rhymes. That matters because it turned the feud from romantic scandal into credibility warfare. Now we are not just talking about who moved on. We are talking about who built whose legend, who is lying about contributions, who owns the pen, and who gets to revise history after the breakup. Fat Joe reposted the track, and artists like Memphis Bleak, Murda Mook, Mia X, and Milliz showed support in the comments, which told you immediately that the culture was not treating this like some random vent session. People heard it as Remy reestablishing authorship and reminding the room that if this gets lyrical, she is still the most dangerous person involved. And that is where Papoose's image starts taking real damage, because Flip-Flop Pap keeps talking like a man who wants credit from multiple timelines at once. On one hand, he wants the public to remember the loyal husband era, the prison era devotion, the decade-long public image of being the stand-up guy. On the other hand, he wants to push the idea that the marriage had already been cooked, that the divorce was in motion, and that he was justified in moving forward. And look, maybe parts of that are true. Divorce is messy and rarely linear. But public image does not grade nuance kindly. Public image grades consistency. So when Remy is rapping like somebody reclaiming her own narrative, and Pap is speaking like somebody trying to update the terms after the fact, the audience starts side-eyeing everything. One person sounds like they came to fight for authorship. The other sounds like he is still editing the timeline. That is brutal in a culture that values memory. Piece 4 is where Claressa keeps proving that she can dominate in the ring and still lose control of the conversation outside it. In late July, on the Ariel Helwani show, she said she did not know many of Remy Ma's songs, then delivered a freestyle including the line about someone being mad she was papped up. Now let me ask you something. If you truly do not care, why is the identity of the woman you supposedly do not care about still present in your freestyle posture? That is what made the clip travel. Not because it was the wildest diss ever, but because it confirmed that this was still active in her head. Then in June, she had already posted on X that if someone is not saying her name, they are not dissing her, saying she would 100% diss anybody back. Again, what does that tell the audience? Not calm, not distance. It tells the audience she is actively scanning subs, actively waiting for smoke, actively ready to answer. That is not unbothered energy. That is perimeter defense energy. And Piece 5 might be the clearest one of all, because it happened on a weekend that should have belonged almost exclusively to Claressa. On August 15th, Claressa Shields beat Kay Scott by 6th round TKO in Atlanta, with Papoose by her side. That should have been a clean championship narrative: dominant fighter, big arena, star entrance, belt talk, legacy talk, move on. Instead, the same weekend became loaded with Remy Ma teasing "wanna go," using the "knuck if you buck" energy, reposting Claressa-related content, and placing Alicia Baumgardner and Amanda Serrano in the visual orbit of the moment. So now the audience is not only discussing the win. They are discussing whether Remy hijacked the weekend, whether Claressa responded, whether rivals and critics are piling on, and whether Pap looks like support or like an accessory in somebody else's PR war. That is narrative leakage on a catastrophic level. The champion won the fight, but the moment did not stay clean. And oh, do I have more, because this is the part the loud defenders of Crash Out Champ and Too Much Time Pap are really not going to like. If you thought the public posts were messy, the cultural read got even nastier, because once the blogs, radio shows, cosigns, jokes, and rival callouts started stacking up, this stopped being a private dispute with public clips and became an everybody has an opinion ecosystem. And in that ecosystem, one thing matters almost more than facts: what the culture feels in its stomach when it watches you move. The next layer is where you start seeing who got sympathy, who got clowned, who got credibility, and who accidentally confirmed the exact narrative they were trying to outrun. So stay with me, because when we get to the industry side of why a boxer's win still could not escape a rapper's shadow, you are going to see why this story is bigger than one couple, one interview, or one song. The cultural evidence starts with cosigns, because cosigns tell you how the room is leaning even when the room pretends it is neutral. When Remy dropped W.Y.F.L, the response was not silence. Fat Joe reposted it, and big names including Memphis Bleak, Murda Mook, Mia X, and Millas showed visible support. Now, was that a formal jury verdict? No. But culturally, it meant people with actual history in rap were willing to signal that Remy still sounded like Remy. That matters because one of the subplots here is Papoose's old claim that he wrote most of her raps. If the culture thought Remy sounded empty without Pap, those moments would land differently. Instead, the reaction told you people were hearing a woman who still had control of tone, cadence, and venom. That undercuts a whole lot of revisionist talk. One person was out here giving interviews about timelines. The other person was dropping bars and getting fire emojis from names that matter. Which one sounds more stable in hip-hop terms? Exactly. Then you get the Breakfast Club optics, and this is where Flip-Flop Pap really starts looking like a man living in split screen. Papoose went on with Claressa and effectively leaned on reputation, reminding people of the years they watched him ride for Remy, while Claressa jumped in to say divorce takes time and it's papers. Later, in other interviews, she doubled down, saying that is not somebody's husband because he filed for divorce. Now listen carefully. On paper, that can sound reasonable. In public culture, though, it scans different. Because audiences do not just hear the legal explanation. They hear the emotional shortcut. They hear somebody trying to lawyer the optics instead of outrunning them. And every time Claressa has to clarify that point, it reminds people there is still something to clarify. The strongest relationships do not usually need this much explanatory footwork in public. The more they explain, the more unfinished it feels. And culture is merciless with inconsistency, which is why the jokes mattered more than some people want to admit. Lil Wayne, once updated on the situation, joked that Papoose, like somebody that could beat his ass. 50 Cent had already joked about the possibility of Remy and Claressa fighting. Now, are jokes legal proof of anything? Of course not. But jokes are cultural weather reports. When major public figures start treating your relationship scandal like open comedy material, it means your seriousness has been punctured. It means the public no longer sees your rollout as dignified. They see it as content. And once you become content, the audience gets less charitable. Every explanation sounds like spin. Every affectionate post sounds strategic. Every outing feels like a rebuttal disguised as romance. That is how a relationship narrative becomes manufactured entertainment, even if some of the feelings inside it are real. Cultural evidence piece 4 is where the side characters start telling on the main plot. Princess from Crime Mob said Claressa had blocked her after she asked about using her "Knuck If You Buck" verse for a walkout, and Remy later leaned into the same song family while teasing "Wanna Go," reposting a clip of Claressa talking about how we all love "Knuck If You Buck." That is not just petty internet choreography. That is symbolic warfare. The song itself becomes a cultural object both sides now touch from different angles. One side is trying to keep the focus on athletic greatness. The other side is reframing the moment through rap memory, Southern anthem energy, and you want my leftovers type imagery. That is why this does not feel like random internet chatter. It feels curated. It feels like both sides understand that in the era of reposts, a clip does not have to be a diss to function like one. Then Alicia Baumgardner steps in, and this is where the weekend's energy got uglier for Claressa from a culture standpoint. According to reports, Alicia seemingly accused Claressa of copying a way in look and called the behavior obsessive and nasty work. Now, maybe somebody says that is irrelevant side beef. I disagree. It matters because it piles onto the exact narrative Claressa cannot afford in a moment like this. She needs to project singularity, mastery, focus, and being too original to be rattled by anyone. But when the conversation expands from, is she responding to Remy, to, is she also being called a copier by another rival, the room starts to feel crowded around her for the wrong reasons. Champions are supposed to make the room orbit them. This made it look like the room was closing in. And to be fair, there is a counterargument here. Somebody could say Claressa is simply outspoken, competitive, and unwilling to let people disrespect her name. Somebody could say she is a fighter, so of course she talks like a fighter, and rap fans are unfairly expecting boxer behavior to translate into hip-hop etiquette. That is a fair point for about 10 seconds. Then it collapses. Because once you voluntarily enter the music-adjacent conversation, freestyle on interview platforms, respond to subliminals, explain relationship timelines on radio, and get folded into diss promo cycles, you are no longer being judged as only a fighter. You are participating in a hybrid space. And in that hybrid space, discipline matters even more, not less. The more crossover you want, the more precise you have to be. Otherwise, the culture reads you as overextended. The last cultural piece is subtle, but it might be the most revealing. Around Christmas rumors, Claressa publicly corrected people saying Papoose spent the holiday with Remy and their daughter, insisting he was with his mother and family. While reports also noted confusing storepost optics involving Remy and Pap that got people talking. Now ask yourself, why does that matter? Because it shows how unstable the public map of this triangle still is. A stable new relationship does not have to constantly contest who is where, who is with whom, and what a family appearance did or did not mean. The mere fact that these holiday rumors had traction tells you the audience still perceives the old bond as unresolved, or at least emotionally unfinished. And when that perception exists, every new post by Claressa or Pap gets read through insecurity first. That is brutal. This is gossip, you are missing the machine under it. This is not just about who is mad. This is about how modern celebrity conflict is manufactured, monetized, and distributed across overlapping industries, and why some people keep thinking they are winning while the system quietly assigns them the losing role. First, systemic angle. Narrative ownership in the crossover economy. Claressa Shields is one of the greatest women boxers ever. That part is not up for debate. But greatness in sport does not automatically transfer to narrative control in hip-hop media spaces. Those are different ecosystems with different currencies. Boxing rewards measurable dominance, visible conditioning, decisive wins, sanctioned outcomes. Hip-hop media rewards timing, wit, symbolism, memory, and emotional positioning. In boxing, if you beat somebody clearly, the result stabilizes the conversation. In hip-hop culture, you can win a measurable event and still lose the story if the audience feels your opponent owns the emotional center. That is exactly what appears to be happening here. Claressa can collect belts, dominate opponents, and still watch a fight week get contaminated by a rapper's music rollout, rival cameos, and subtext-heavy social content. That is not because boxing is less real. It is because the internet now collapses all public arenas into one feed, and the feed does not care about traditional boundaries. What I think is happening here is that Claressa underestimated how punishing rap-adjacent narrative spaces can be for somebody who is used to athletic merit deciding the room. In a fight, your jab, your conditioning, and your ring IQ eventually rescue you. In the timeline economy, they do not. In the timeline economy, if the audience decides you are scanning subs, defending a half-finished domestic transition, and over-explaining your relationship status, every victory becomes porous. Even your confidence gets translated against you. I don't beef with bitches, I beat bitches might land as fighter bravado in one room and she is definitely bothered in another. That is why this is so fascinating. A champion entered a narrative arena that treats composure as strategy and strategy as survival, and now every response is costing more than she likely intended. Second systemic angle, media incentives. People keep asking why the story will not die, and the answer is simple. Because the system does not reward closure. It rewards recurrence. A clean divorce filing is boring. A legally unresolved but publicly active triangle is content gold. A boxing win is news. A boxing win that intersects with a rapper's diss rollout, old cheating allegations, social captions, rival cameos, and breakfast show interviews is a multi-vertical engagement engine. Hip-hop blogs can cover it. Sports blogs can cover it. Radio can discuss it. Clip channels can excerpt it. Reaction channels can dramatize it. Comment pages can turn every sentence into a referendum. In that environment, nobody is being nudged toward peace. They're all being incentivized toward one more explanation, one more bar, one more quote, one more, let me clear this up. The machine eats clarification and spits out escalation. And pay attention to how Papoose functions inside that machine. Legally, it may be true that divorce takes time and a filing starts a process. Publicly, Papoose becomes a floating shield, a phrase used to declare moral permission without ever fully neutralizing emotional optics. It is procedural language trying to defeat symbolic language. And symbolic language wins online almost every time. The audience is not asking, was a filing submitted? The audience is asking, why does this still feel unfinished? Those are different questions. Pap and Claressa keep answering the first question while the internet keeps asking the second. That gap is where the engagement lives. That gap is also where Remy keeps benefiting because her music and posts do not need to solve the paperwork. They only need to make the unresolved feeling sharper. Third systemic angle, legacy ownership and authorship. This may be the deepest piece of all. When Papoose previously claimed he wrote most of Remy's rhymes, he was not just dissing her as an ex. He was making a legacy claim. He was saying, in effect, the career you think you know may not belong to the person you think built it. That is a nuclear accusation in rap because it attacks not just talent, but memory. Remy's answer through W.Y.F.L matters far beyond relationship mess because it is an attempt to defend ownership over her own artistic identity. That is why so many people heard that track as more than petty. It was a refusal to let a breakup become a rewrite of the archive. And once that layer exists, every other part of the feud gets more loaded. Now Claressa is not merely the new woman. She is adjacent to a man publicly contesting a legendary rapper's authorship while standing beside her as the relationship becomes content. That makes Claressa's every appearance heavier because she is now standing next to a disputed narrator. And this is exactly why Flip-Flop Pap looks worse the more he talks. Because in one era, he was brand equity. He was the man whose loyalty gave him moral glow. In this era, every sentence risks reducing him from participant in a love story to administrator of competing excuses. He is no longer just defending a relationship. He is defending his own previous self, his current choices, the timeline, the authorship dispute, and the public optics of moving on. That is too many fronts. Nobody wins that. One person makes the art and lets the culture debate it. The other keeps stepping into interviews trying to explain why the old mythology should still count while the new one gets installed. That is exhausting, and audiences can smell exhaustion. So here is the major truth bomb, and once you see it, you cannot unsee it. Remy Ma's rail warning was never just "don't play with me" in the emotional sense. The rail warning was structural. It was this: if you drag me into your rollout, I will become the lens through which the rollout is judged. That is what happened. Claressa Shields can win a fight by technical knockout, walk in with stars around her, have a historic resume, and still leave a chunk of the internet talking about whether she responded to Remy, whether she looked pressed, whether Alicia just called her a copycat, whether the "nuck if you buck" thing was shade, whether Papoose looked awkward, and whether the whole weekend got hijacked. That is the power of center of gravity control. The person who controls the frame does not have to control the whole event. They only have to make every event emotionally route through them. And that means Claressa's biggest mistake was not talking back one time. It was accepting a battle of translation she was never going to dominate. In the ring, her body speaks with authority. In this feud, her words keep getting translated by people who do not fundamentally care about athletic merit. They care about optics, code, and subtext. So every attempt to look fearless can read as thirsty. Every attempt to look romantic can read as defensive. Every attempt to explain the divorce can read as a confession that the public still has a right to question it. And because she keeps stepping back into that arena, the interpretation compounds. That is why the responses matter anyway. Not because any single quote is career-ending, but because the pattern tells on her. Papoose's truth bomb is even harsher. The man who once benefited from being seen as unwavering now keeps producing footage, interviews, and side-by-side optics that make him look like a man who wants the moral credit of the old chapter and the excitement of the new one without fully surviving the transition between them. That is why I call him Flip-Flop Pap. Because the public does not experience him as settled. They experience him as toggling. Loyal husband memory on one screen, best friend new love rollout on the other, divorce explanation in the middle, authorship accusations in the background, family optics still floating over everything. That is too unstable to command full respect. And once a man loses the ability to sound internally aligned, everybody around him starts getting graded through that instability too. So the harshest conclusion is this: Remy may not currently own the cleanest emotional story, but she still appears to own the most powerful narrative position. Why? Because she can enter through music, through memory, through direct bars, through implication, through timing, and through the culture's pre-existing understanding of her. Claressa has to keep proving she is not bothered. Pap has to keep proving he is not contradicting himself. Remy only has to choose moments. That is asymmetric warfare. That is why the audience keeps snapping back toward her even when she is not the one with the belt, the interview, or the public date night footage. The loudest person in the room is not always the one in charge. Sometimes the one in charge is simply the person the room cannot stop organizing itself around. And that is why, in the long run, the hero resolution here is not about pretending Remy is perfect. It is about recognizing whose skill set is built for surviving this kind of public warfare. Remy Ma is still a rapper first. That means she understands rhythm, timing, framing, memory, and the art of letting one line do the work of 5 explanations. She does not need to win every internet day to win the deeper argument. She needs to remind the audience that she still has a pen, still has presence, and still has the ability to make everybody else respond on terrain she understands better than they do. And that matters. Because discipline in hip-hop is not only about staying silent. Sometimes discipline is knowing exactly when to speak and in what format. Claressa can absolutely still be the hero of her own boxing story. I want to be clear about that. Greatness in the ring is greatness in the ring. But in this specific crossover mess, she keeps volunteering to be measured by a culture that is not grading her best attribute first. That is a strategic mistake, not a talent issue. She is built to dominate opponents. This feud keeps forcing her to dominate perception, and perception is slipperier than a title defense. The more she tries to punch through it, the more it multiplies. One person throws hands in the ring. The other throws timing into the timeline. While Crash Out Champ is trying to win every reaction battle, Remy is still making the room ask the only question that matters. Why does everybody keep talking back to the person they claim does not matter? That contrast says the whole story in one line. And for Papoose, the only path back to dignity is consistency. Not more interviews. Not more explanations. Not more timeline management. Consistency. If the divorce is the truth, let the truth become final. If the new relationship is the truth, let it exist without constantly performing a defense brief in public. If the old mythology is gone, stop trying to cash it in while dismantling it at the same time. Because right now, too much time Pap feels like a man trying to narrate over footage the audience already watched with its own eyes. That never ends well. So yes, the right person is still winning in the only way that matters here, by retaining cultural leverage. Not perfect leverage. Not spotless leverage. Cultural leverage. The ability to make your opponents overtalk, overexplain, and overperform while you remain the reference point. That is why the story keeps bending the way it bends. That is why the audience keeps course-correcting back toward the same center. And that is why I've been saying this kind of thing for a long time. In public disputes, composure is not the absence of emotion. Composure is control over where the audience looks next. And this is only the start, because there are at least 2 concrete developments still hanging over the story like storm clouds. The first one is simple. The divorce narrative cannot stay in paperwork limbo forever. The longer that remains a talking point instead of a concluded chapter, the longer every public appearance by Papoose and Claressa stays vulnerable to the exact same questions. The second one is the content cycle itself. If Remy keeps rapping, teasing visuals, or dropping lines that the audience can decode in real time, then every new Claressa interview, every new fight week, every new Pap appearance risks being pulled back into this orbit again. And if Claressa keeps answering, even indirectly, then the pattern only gets stronger. So yes, drop your thoughts, because I really want to know where you land on this now that the whole board is laid out. Did Claressa defend herself the way a champion should, or did she step into a narrative trap she could not control? Is Papoose really moving forward, or is he still stuck trying to have the emotional credit of the past and the public validation of the present? And is Remy simply bitter, or is she proving that the person with the sharpest understanding of timing still runs this story whether people like it or not? And when you are done with this one, the next video you need to watch is the deeper breakdown of how Papoose's ghostwriting claims against Remy may have damaged his own legacy more than hers, because that story is not really about one accusation. It is about what happens when the man who once looked like loyalty itself starts rewriting the archive after the love story collapses. That one has a bigger shock, a nastier mystery, and a payoff that changes how you read this entire saga.